Welcome to the Two Tall Jews Show, presented by the On This Day in Jewish History Instagram page and brought to you by Best Shop Productions. On today's show, we have a very special guest, Rabbi Pinchas Landis from our partners in Torah Cleveland. We had a very fun conversation with him, a fellow Jewish history educator. Rabbi Landis sat with us to chat about Jewish history, teaching Jewish history in 2020, and the challenges and benefits and everything in between. In addition, we're going to be chatting about our respective posts of the week, a deep dive into the Munich Massacre of the Israeli athletes 48 years later. We're going to chat about the Minister of Absorption. We're going to chat about the We're going to chat about the Minister of Absorption in Israel. I hope I said that right. Pnina Tamano-Shata and her recent policy plays in an Israeli government that hasn't done much on a domestic level recently. And then we're going to close it off with Bubbe's delight. Isaac? Take us away. I changed it up. We got this.
We're a set of tall Jews. We have a show, and we are ready to go. For those listening for the first time, this show is about going deeper into the topics we merely touch on in our captions on the Instagram page. What Instagram page, you might ask? At On This Day in Jewish History, 1H.
Our goal here is to make you think, question, laugh, and cry, and get to know us a little bit, and then have fun while we're at it. This is actually our 10th episode of the podcast. We are, super excited to have come this far, and we thank you for joining us. Now on to the show. We're going to kick off today's show with the On This Day in Jewish History rundown, where we go into a little bit deeper into our respective favorite posts of the week. Isaac, why don't you two go first? I feel like I've spoken enough at the top of here. Yeah.
Sounds good. So my favorite post was issued 3 days ago, and it marked the 1899. So it marked the 121st anniversary of Mark Twain's essay titled Concerning the Jews, which was published in 1899. And what was interesting, I thought, and I'll get to this in a moment, Mark Twain, in addition to being known for one of the great American writers, it was also a friend of Jews later in life. He had Jewish friends, and he was a proud Zionist, and his quotes on Israel are really fascinating. Everybody loves Mark Twain, but they don't talk about that stuff. So I think that's interesting. Anyway, so he, in 1896, while living in Austria, he wrote a piece titled Stirring Times in Austria. And he got a lot of attention. He got a lot of mail. And a Jewish lawyer asked him, so why is this? Why do people despise Jews? What does this stem from? And so
because the Austrian paper was talking about how in Austria they use Jews as scapegoats, right?
Right. And right, exactly. And that was what Twain discussed in his initial post. And the letter by this Jewish lawyer inspired Twain to write sort of a response essay of sorts. And that's the one that we commemorated in the post. And he essentially attributed, he said, listen, the Egyptians came, the Babylonians came, the Persians came, they all had their rise and they all rose and fall. And the people that ultimately triumphed throughout all of this time, that saw all of this, that were persecuted by those people and lived to tell the story and have been thriving, are the Jews. And he attributed the scapegoating and the anti-Semitism to feelings of envy of their economic success, envy of their cultural success, and envy of the way in which they've been able to thrive in a larger secular society.
Right. Yeah, I think it's super fascinating. It's always nice finding these little tidbits, because that's a famous quote. I've seen that before, and it's just cool being like, oh, he literally wrote that and published it today.
Yeah.
And I think the most fascinating thing personally is how little things have changed. Where yes, we have Israel, yes, we have progressed, and you can't say we're in 1899 level of treatment of Jews, but to an extent, the way that Jews are spoken about hasn't changed
Yeah.
that much.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was interesting is that, so Twain grew up in Missouri, and he
Mm-hmm.
grew up in a town where there was only one Jewish family. And so he when he was younger, he harbored sort of the similar sort of societal anti-Semitism that was so prevalent. And shortly after the Civil War, and sort of just during that time, he changed, and his views on Jews changed, and it got to the point where he remarked to his daughter, you know, he sort of complimented the Jews as a race, as this sort of thriving race, and and yeah, from then on, it was, and I'm pretty sure he traveled to the Middle East and experienced time in
In Israel?
in
Or,
Israel. Yeah,
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 it's interesting. So, I look forward to, actually want to check out the full document. I think it's available online. You can check it out, titled "Concerning the Jews" by Mark Twain. And I think he's a humorist, right? He's known as like one of the first comedians, you would say, one of the first like modern comics. Um, it's interesting that he titled it "Concerning the Jews." I think he did that on purpose, knowing that it would be interpreted as Jew hate, as a
right.
hateful document.
Yeah, because
Right.
that probably brought in a wide readership.
Right, more clicks.
Yeah,
Twain.
yeah,
Mark was very aware of that sort of
yeah.
thing.
He was, he caught on to clickbait
Right,
before there was clickbait.
exactly. Moving on. So my favorite post or recent posts, it was the passing of Rav Abraham Isaac Kook in 1935. He is known as the father of religious Zionism, which I think we'll get into that a little bit right now, but I think it's a little bit of a contradiction personally, because I think religious people have always been Zionist. But he was essentially the first Ashkenazi official rabbi of British Mandatory Palestine, or Israel. And his whole, the rationale behind his movement of why he was a Zionist, why he was part of a movement that was filled with secular atheist Jews who didn't really care for, right, the things that he cared for in that sense, was that he could sort of see past their differences, and he was aware of the impact that the land of Israel has on the Jewish people. He was aware of how weak the Jews had gotten in exile, and I think we sort of forgot this level, especially as American Jews, because it didn't happen so much here, as opposed to Europe, where it was this struggle between assimilation or, super seemingly outdated ultra Orthodox, observancies. There was no middle ground whatsoever, and I think he saw the coming back to Israel as that middle ground, like resurfacing, reemerging. And one of our writers, Meredith Benson, did a very good job of going into his rationale on this post. For example, Rav Kook says that the full and varied character of Jewish life could not achieve expression given oppression and exposure to foreign winds, and that although he was surrounded by a movement that wasn't religious, he saw it simply as arrogance that was actually part of the path towards the eventual redemption from Mashiach. So he actually saw their involvement, the secular atheist Zionists such as Herzl and the others. He actually saw their involvement as a part of the plan, because at the end of the day, he saw them as Jews. Obviously, he disagreed with them, but it didn't matter. And if you look at his picture, he looks, he's wearing one of those strimals. He looks like the kind of guy who probably wouldn't support Israel nowadays. And he did. And his writing, he was a Kabbalist. He was obviously, he wrote about other things that didn't have to do with Israel. And, I highly recommend going into some of his teachings. He speaks to both super observant people and not. So, we mourn his loss and also thank him for his contributions.
Can we, before you get into, I wanted to say, or I wanted to ask you, religious Zionism. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that's a bit redundant.
Yes.
So, what is it? Why why do you believe, and I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with this, why do you believe that all religious Jews are Zionists by default?
Because they say it. I mean, if we define Zionism as like the word, just the word, not the political definition of it,
Uh-huh.
it's literally a yearning for Zion. What is Zion? Zion is the mountain upon which the temple was built. It's in Jerusalem. And and we've spoken about this, but in almost every prayer, the prayers that are said by religious people 3 times a day, Jerusalem is mentioned. Zion is mentioned multiple times. So it's nowadays it's like you can differentiate it because you can say, oh, I'm not like a political Zionist. I'm not a Zionist in the sense that the word has been defined by the movement, but you still yearn for Zion because you say it all the time, and we read about it all the time. It's
So it sounds like all religious Jews are Zionists, but not all Zionists are religious.
correct. And at the same time, I have a lot of religious friends. I have a lot of observant. I'm part of an observant community, and some of them are like hesitant to say that they're Zionists because they can't separate the secular political definitions of Zionism from the religious. And I think that that's something that Rav Kook was like, yo, they're not that different.
Do you think that was always the case? That Do you think there was a time in which religious Jews could say they were Zionists, and the
Yeah,
people who were saying that too were able to divorce that from a political
yeah, I think yeah, for
ideology?
sure,
Or okay,
for sure. I think it was before. It had to have been before Herzl and
right,
his group sort of packed it up into the way that they did, because every single at the end of Pesach for forever we've said next year in Jerusalem. At the end of Yom Kippur we say next year in Jerusalem. It has nothing to do with Zionism. It has nothing to do with Herzl, but we say that. So yeah, I think that in and that goes to something we've also mentioned. I don't know if you said it on the podcast, but I think you and I have said it in privately, where Jews used to be known as Israelites. Like it was not a question. Jews were known as Hebrews and Israelites, and now it's like, are they? Because of like, different streams of anti-Semitic propaganda that have separated us from that essence that for a very long time, even while we were in Europe. And that's why Jews were never accepted in Europe, because they were always outsider Hebrew Israelites who were different, who were always talking about going back to this place, who once a year mourn about the destruction of some building in this place. I saw this year on Tisha B'Av, there's a famous, I don't know if it's true, but I saw it somewhere where Napoleon was riding through Europe, and it was Tisha B'Av, and he's riding past the synagogue, and he sees all these Jews sitting outside on the floor with candles and ashes, and he's like, what's going on here? And somebody tells him, oh, they're mourning for the destruction of the temple. He's like, when did that happen? They're like, oh, 1700 years ago. And he's like, whoa, so you're telling me that these people are still mourning for something that happened 1700 years ago? Oh, they're for sure going to get that back.
I mean,
So yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this idea of sort of like mourning generationally. I mean, I still haven't gotten over the Holocaust, so I mean, I
Yeah.
think that.
And that creates a different issue within us, where it's like, oh, all we do is talk about suffering. All we do is talk about, like, Elon Gold. I just saw him right before we got on the podcast. I saw him making a joke about that, how no matter how happy we get, it's like, oh, but don't forget, we were almost wiped out. And it's like, and I got a lot of criticism, like, constructively for a while. All we were doing was posting about the Inquisition or about some pogrom. And so I was saying, like, I don't get to decide what we post about. Like, I just look at the calendar. We decide what's major, what's minor, whatever. But if you're realizing that in that period of 3 weeks, where really bad things happen to the Jews, where it's like, oh wow, like all you're doing is posting on bad things. It's because like, yeah, in these 3 weeks, a lot of bad things happened. That was right during the 3 weeks between summer. So we, and so my response to that is like, yeah, so we build on it. We talk about resiliency, right? Like Mark Twain said, we went through it all and we're still here. What's our secret? I don't know. I mean, I do know, but I don't want to say it because I don't want to reveal it. So
you'll have to convert to find out.
Yep. And you can send us a DM. We are doing we are streamlining conversions now. Yeah. I'm just kidding. We're about to
recognized in 15 states. No.
We are kidding. We don't. If you want to convert to Judaism, please call your local rabbi.
We'll drop a link.
Yeah. And you can start off your own process.
If you want to convert to Judaism, we're creating an app called TeleJew, where it's the offshoot of telehealth, where you talk to a rabbi for 15 minutes and they prescribe you some Jew.
On-demand Jew. So moving on, let's talk about Munich. So this past week commemorated the 48th anniversary of the hostage, the kidnapping, and the assassination of 11 Israeli athletes and coaches combined in the 1972 Munich Olympics. So obviously everybody knows what happened. If you haven't checked out our post, go check it out. It was on September 5th, 2020. And I think the point that I want to talk about, because I don't want to get into the details of exactly what happened. Again, you can check out our post. I want to talk about the aftermath. 2 points specifically, and I'll let you respond to this. Number one, the fact that the Olympics weren't canceled. They kept playing after this happened. And when they wanted to have a moment of silence the day after it happened, after they were murdered on September 7th, they did it almost reluctantly. Like they didn't want to do it. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that in 2012, when we marked the 40th anniversary of these tragic events, the Olympic Committee did not want to hold a moment of silence. I don't know if they did in the end. I don't think they did. And
no,
NBC
they didn't. And I have something to say about that. Go ahead.
They didn't hold a moment of silence on the 40th anniversary. And then when Bob Costas was talking about it, I saw this last night, they cut him off and they went to commercials. While he was mentioning, while the 2012 Israeli delegation was walking out and they were talking about it. So, and then of course, actually the third point is, and this goes back to like the events that happened, where was the security at the Munich grounds? Why was this not anticipated, and why was the hostage situation so botched? So let's start with the blatant passive anti-Semitism from the Olympic Committee back in 1972 and today, and then we'll move on to, I guess it's connected to why these terrorists were able to get in.
So the first part was why do I think there wasn't as good security, or why did they not hold a moment of silence?
No, let's talk about just the general passive anti-Semitism and complicitness of the Olympic Committee and NBC in 2012.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy thing to say, yeah, it's tough.
The question is, at the end of the day, why is Jewish blood so cheap, and why are we able to look past it immediately? Literally the next day, they didn't want to hold a moment of silence, and certain countries were like, nah, like, I don't want to do this.
I mean, because I don't know the answer and I'm speculating, my two things. So one, it was held in Munich of all places. Right. Two, I don't know. So to add further context to the situation, the 11 athletes that were killed were part of the wrestling team, the Olympic wrestling team. And I don't know if Israel had the number one wrestling team that year, or if they were sort of secretly happy that, other wrestling teams were able to vie for gold. I don't know if they already had their matches. I know the timeline of that. But what I do know is that Germany, just as a government, independent of the Olympic Committee, was essentially, they felt like they were walking on eggshells with regard to, like, we want to, we're not going to condemn this publicly, but this is terrible that it happened privately. And it just sort of, talk about botched. Not only was the hostage, crisis botched, but what was also botched was the further response. I mean, I think that, to your point about Jewish blood being cheap, I don't know if people were jaded or if they just, I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm not trying to give people benefit of the doubt, but I think that their anti-Semitism was made apparent through silence.
Yeah.
And now, do you know? Now, Golda Meir, she was, I think she was rather very vocal about, we don't negotiate with terrorists.
Yeah.
This is our policy. I don't know. You know more about this than I do. What was the status of the security at that part of the Olympic Village or at the hotel?
There wasn't.
What?
That was one of the things that they were happy about, the fact that it was going to be open, where we can do this in Germany again. It's all good. We're not going to have guards. We're not going to have guns. It's going to be great. It's going to be so nice.
I mean, come to think of it, if there was heightened security for the Israeli athletes, and let's say, or just all Jewish athletes in general, more so than there were for other athletes, I feel like everyone would have been saying, why do they get preferential treatment?
Yeah, we're not saying give them personal protection.
No, right, but
just
it's
secure the Olympic Village.
Right. Yeah.
How could 8 armed men just walk right in? They literally walked right in. And then when they were trying to save them while they were still in the village, the terrorists were watching them on TV, broadcasting these soldiers setting up around the building. So they were like, get out of the building or we're going to shoot everybody in the room. So they were like, okay, well, we should leave. I think the movie Munich does a very good job of showing just the awful botchery. The best way, obviously, it's to read about it, read about how Germany failed miserably in rescuing them, and then even publicly, denouncing it. And then of course, 40 years later in 2012, when Bob Costas tries to do a moment of silence, and when the people request the Olympic Committee to do a moment of silence, they reject it.
8 years ago, the Olympic gymnast Ali Reisman, who is Jewish, was asked, because that sort of became a story. Well, it did become a story, this idea of not having a moment of silence. And she said, and she was rightfully praised for her comments. She said, I think it would have been nice if there was a moment of silence.
That's all people are asking for. We're not asking you to wave the Israeli flag and sing Hatikva.
Right.
Just pretend you care.
Right.
But
which is literally what a moment of silence is for the people that decide whether or not there is a moment of silence. It's not like they're sort of spilling their actual convictions about whether or not they actually. No, it's about saving face.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know people are still upset, and like I said, it's just yet another example of Jewish blood being cheap. I just saw something about how the world forgave Germany for what they did in the Holocaust, but we can't forgive Israel for defending itself. So it's just more of the same. And when you ask yourself why awful things happened in 2020, you don't have to look far to realize that worse has happened and nobody flinched. So we have to continue to be proud and continue to be, vigilant and to call things out like this, because now we have platforms where we can, and not let even the Olympic Committee get away with. And now, Rabbi Pinchas Landis. We have a very special guest. We're very excited to introduce Rabbi Pinchas Landis from Partners in Torah Cleveland and the host of the Today in Jewish History podcast. Rabbi Pinchas Landis grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. He spent a total of 9 years at Yeshiva University, Or Sameach Tannenbaum College, and the Ner Israel Rabbinical College. He has also done a postgraduate work towards a master's in community counseling at Johns Hopkins University before serving as the education director of Partners in Torah Cleveland. Rabbi Landis was also a congregational rabbi in Cincinnati. He is a dynamic, fascinating speaker and teacher specializing in the areas of Jewish history, Jewish inspiration. He also enjoys rock climbing, reading, business books, working out, graphic and web design, and playing with anything electronic. And of course, Rabbi Landis is active on Instagram, where he posts daily occurrences in Jewish history corresponding to the Hebrew calendar through his account at Rabbi PLL. Rabbi Landis, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And by the way, I'm also a tall Jew, because even though you can't tell here on Zoom, I am about 6'4". So I fit that bill as well over here.
Nice.
So.
We were about to ask, we always ask our guests how tall they are to see if it's either 2 or 3 or maybe 4 tall Jews. We'll update the logo.
Right, at least for today. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. So Rabbi, we're just going to get into it. How did you arrive at our Partners in Torah, and what enticed you about the organization? Give us the elevator pitch.
Okay, awesome. So as you so eloquently read in my bio, before I was here in Cleveland, I was in Cincinnati. I'd been there for about 8 years, started off working for the Cincinnati Community Kollel, doing an initiative that ended up morphing into a shul, sort of like a kiruv outreach-oriented situation. That synagogue ended up merging with a bigger synagogue. And at that point, I felt like in many ways I was not doing the things I love to do. I was doing a lot of things that rabbis do, funerals and visiting the sick and all that stuff, which was all wonderful, wonderful things, but didn't feel that it played to my strengths. So there I was looking to make a change. There was an opportunity to move up to Cleveland to found Partners in Torah of Cleveland. I was the founding member, if you will, of the organization, which is just a non-formal, informal Jewish education organization trying to get Jews learning Torah, studying Torah anywhere, everywhere that they want to. And my sort of entrepreneurial spirit led me right up here to get it going. And we've been here now 6 years. We've gotten several hundred people here in Cleveland involved in our programming. And roughly, probably about 2.5, 3 years ago, we started actively working in the digital realm with podcasting, with videos. Today in Jewish History was actually our first initiative, first of 2. We started 2 at the same time, but that was one of our first ones that we started. And very excited about where it's gone, very excited about where it's going. And, that's the elevator pitch, like you said.
Right. And if you had to say, who's the target audience, and you mentioned a couple of platforms, what are the primary platforms that people can find our Partners in Torah?
So for our podcasting, we put our podcasting into one sort of brand that we call Jewcast, or Jewcast.com, which we haven't fully built out, but that is a place where you can find all 4 of our podcasts that we have now. We have the Today Jewish History podcast, which is how we all first met. We have a podcast called The Rabbi's Podcast, which is with me and another local rabbi, where we have a weekly conversation, and often revolving around Jewish history or the studies of the prophets and the writings, which we feel is an understudied area in Judaism and is really the basis of Jewish history. That's where, if you want to ask the questions of what the first Jewish history book is, that would be Tanakh. So that's a lot of what we focus on in the Rabbi's Podcast. We have another daily podcast called the Navi Podcast, which is a daily 5-minute trip through the prophets. And then we have Back to the Past, which is meant to be a comprehensive Jewish history, starting with creation. We're up until about the rebuilding, right at the rebuilding of the Second Commonwealth. And those are the 4 podcasts they can find at Jewcast.com if they're interested, or if you're interested, or if anyone's interested.
So, Rabbi, how would you define some of the modern-day challenges that Jewish educators have to communicate with the target generation?
I would say the 2 main challenges in Jewish education nowadays in trying to communicate or inspire with the present world are number 1, apathy, and number two, distractions, which really play hand in hand. I think that the distractions lead way to the apathy, and the apathy leads way to the distractions, depending on where on the floor you're at. I find that's a problem for sure in the Jewish world, and according to many articles I've read, it's a problem really across the world, as there's just a tremendous apathy, an apathy towards Judaism, an apathy towards religion. While you have plenty of people out there who will identify as Jews, the number of people who care that they are Jews is dwindling tremendously, and the ability to get them into the realm of the caring is very challenging. It was when I was a kid, let's say 20, 25, 30 years ago, you had these Eish HaTorah, both of you have mentioned you went on the Hasbara program. Hasbara is one of the wonderful Eish HaTorah programs in the world today. And Eish HaTorah used to have a very active program called the Discovery Seminar. I'm not sure if that was part of Hasbara when you were on it, but Discovery at one point was a week-long program, and then it got boiled down to a weekend program, and now it's like they do this 2-hour sessions. But one of the reasons they do it like that is because people won't pay attention for that long. They can't get people's attention for a week on end or a weekend or even a full day. So they have to make it these little 1 or 2 hour sessions. And not only that, but it used to be people would come to a Discovery Seminar to learn about Judaism really for the first time for many of these people. And it'd be so eye-opening. They would come out with a renewed connection to their Jewish heritage. Nowadays, you can present the same content in the most dynamic way to people of our generation, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, that's cool, and just go on with their lives. So, there's this apathy, and I think in many ways it's heavily breeded by distraction. One of the reasons we made a very conscious decision to put a lot of effort into digital podcasting, videos, social media, and all that is because, look, we have a society where everybody literally walks around like this. Right? So if everybody's always walking around like this, where do you have to be if you want to reach them? You got to be right here, right? If you're not right here, you're not going to reach them. So that's a challenge for many, especially, in this pandemic, we've seen educators, my age and older, my demographic and older, who have not and do not want to embrace the new world order of the role of digital, and they're having a tremendously difficult time, like taking such people and trying to get them into Zoom classes and video content and these things that are so necessary nowadays. It's very challenging, but I think that's what it boils down to. Just the apathy and distractions of the world today are the biggest challenges.
Right. So just to stay on this topic and to what you just mentioned about needing to be on the phone if that's where you want to reach people, because that's where people are. So, about your podcast and your Instagram, why don't we see more rabbis like you on Instagram or more podcasts? So, and what can we do to change that?
That's a good question. So I'll speak to the podcast first. I think there is a growing number of rabbis and educators and Jewish educators who are using the podcasting platform because people are, first of all, finding out how easy it is and how simple it is to start a podcast. You don't have to have a tremendous technological storehouse, or warehouse in your brain to be able to pull off a podcast. Also, there's now some interesting, at least I know of one, there's a company, I think they're called Jewish Podcasting or something like that, and they're actually trying to help people who are educators who don't know how to start a podcast or run a podcast, where they're helping them at different levels, they have different packages to do it for them. I'm not sure if you've seen Rabbi David Katz's podcast, which is a great Jewish history podcast that's out there, but that's one of their products. It's the same. The parent company is called Jewish Content Network. You probably interface with them on many Jewish websites because they handle the marketing on a lot of Jewish websites. But so in their other departments, they're really starting on trying to help rabbis to get podcasts out there more and more and more. So I think we will see it more. I think with anything, and the Jewish world is no exception to this, people are often slow to adopt new methods of communication. And even though podcasting is in no way new at this point, it's still somewhat new and raw in the Jewish world. And I think that's the simple answer. People are slow to adopt new things. I remember I heard a great quote from one of my favorite historians, Rabbi Beryl Wine, who was talking about the internet and the role of the internet in Jewish education. And I know that in many circles, look, the internet's challenging. Don't get me wrong. It's a blessing and a curse at the same time. It has many challenges, it has many wonderful things. And with our children, I don't think either of you guys are married or have children yet, or one or the other. But for people who have children, it's a whole nother discussion and debate as to internet usage for children and how that should be monitored and filtered, etc. But there's a tendency of many to say, keep it away, keep it completely away. And I once heard Rabbi Wein say that those who want to keep the internet away or forbid the internet for usage is analogous to those who would want to prevent the printing press at the time that it was started. It's the modern printing press. That's what it is. And it's taking many, a long time to catch up and figure out how to do it. Let's face it, the challenges the internet presents are tremendous. So many are reluctant to use it as a venue, as a platform. But as we continue to figure out how to do that in a way that everyone's comfortable with, I think you'll see more and more usage of it.
A couple minutes ago, you spoke about apathy and distraction and the role they play in Jewish life. Is it fair to say that there is a direct relationship between having 2-minute clips and sort of the distraction that you just spoke of?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I mean, let's take it the other way. The Rabbi's podcast is about 40 minutes an episode, and it's the least followed of our. I mean, we have a nice following, but it's the least followed because people know it's a 40-minute commitment, right? If they want to listen to an episode, it takes 40 minutes. So while we have our, a nice listenership, a nice followership on there, the shorter, like the 2 to 3 minute podcast of Today in Jewish History or the 5 minutes and under of the Navi podcast are much more popular because, they're sound bites. They're people who know they can get a chunk of information in a short period of time. And for better or for worse, that's how you can connect with people. So yeah, 100%, Isaac. It's directly correlated to people's attention span and trying to get in their mind, so to speak, in some way, shape, or form.
So shifting away, staying on the topic of Jewish education, but less about, the modern ways of transmitting it. What are some bad recommendations that you've heard in the profession from other rabbis or teachers or principals? What would be something, as us, we're kind of like rogue Jewish educators, what advice would you give us to avoid?
What's some bad advice? I'm gonna flip that around as some bad advice that people will give, and I'll tell you why it's not bad advice. A lot of times, especially when it comes to content development, there's a certain school of thought. And Henry, speaking to you, who your father's in videography, and in videography, there is a perfection needed. Let's face it. If you give a client a non-perfect product, even though to him it might have flaws, but at least that they perceive as less than perfect, they're going to ask for a refund. They're going to ask for money back. They're not going to recommend them. It'll be terrible for business. But I think that digital education is much different than that. And the one piece of advice I got when I started was from really one of my mentors in the realm of digital content distribution, and that's Gary Vaynerchuk, if you guys are familiar with Gary V. And Gary V talks about in his books that, find the subject matter you're passionate about and then just start doing. And the first day, week, month, whatever it is, the content will be terrible. Everything will be terrible. No one will be following. But you'll see that you'll get better. You'll get more familiar. You'll get more of a groove as to what you're doing. And slowly but surely, your quality will go up. And at the same time, your followership, your listenership will go up. And you have no clue what the pot of gold is that's lying at the other end of that rainbow. And that's very much true for us. If you go back and listen to our original episodes of Today in Jewish History, which I don't recommend, they're terrible, on many levels compared to what we're putting out today. So a bad piece of advice that people are given is, don't start putting out content until you know it's perfect. No. Start putting it out, because by virtue of the fact that you're putting it out on the internet means by tomorrow people are going to forget about it anyways. And by the fact that you're doing it on a regular basis, you're going to get better at it. You're going to improve, everything that you do about it, your quality or your quantity, your hardware, your software, everything, improve everything you need to improve and end up with a better product, so that, while you might remember how bad your first episode was, no one else will. And it'll be something that'll help you in the process of becoming better.
Cool. Sort of switching gears on a sort of related note, but not really. So in the last 5 years, what new belief or habit has most improved your life as a result of doing said belief or habit?
In the past 5 years, what belief or habit has most changed my life?
5 years is arbitrary. It could be the last 3 years, but in the past couple of years, yeah.
Specifically in the realm of education, or just anywhere in life?
Anywhere in life.
So I think that the one habit or change, we'll just focus on what we're talking about here, that's made a huge difference, is realizing the potential of social. Sorry, my Alexa keeps going off here. Realizing the potential of social in this world. About let's say in 2018 or so, 2017. I was active on Facebook, and I tried to use it to connect with people and to build up our programs and things, but I wasn't using it with any kind of strategy or as any kind of tool for any means to an end. And then really making that decision, heavily influenced by Gary Vaynerchuk, but that these platforms, social media, podcasting, videos, YouTube, etc., can really be used as platforms for Jewish education and platforms to connect with people. Well, that was huge. It was a paradigm shift for me. It was a paradigm shift in how I spent my time, a paradigm shift on how I worked on connecting with people. And it made a tremendous difference, first on myself personally, for my own growth, because, when you put, as you two probably know, when you put out a daily podcast in Jewish history and you love Jewish history, that means you're spending a lot of time improving on your own knowledge in Jewish history, because, you might have something pops up on a calendar as something that happened, and you might know 10% of it, but you might start that research process and get down into what it really was, and then have a whole new insight into what that event was or is. So I think for me, just realizing the power of what we could do with these tools, roughly 3 years ago, was a huge shift in me as a person and me as an educator and the organization that I run.
Right. So are there some books that you love to give out to people, or like what book do you recommend automatically when we're talking about this topic? It doesn't, obviously the Torah is like the go-to book, but if it's something, more, in English, perhaps something that people can take home and like really understand the value and the scope of Jewish history, what book would that be?
Sure. So there's a lot of great books. Many of them are often recommended by everybody. Some of them I like, some of them I don't like. It kind of depends what you're looking for. First, like you said, Torah is a must. Josephus is a must. If you like classical Jewish history and you can get through it. I happen to love Josephus. I love reading Josephus. Many people don't. Many people find it very hard to read and very challenging. Even the Whiston edition, which is the best translation we have, it's not always so easy to read. I love Rabbi Dr. Schneur Lyman, his content, which is not always so easy to track down. He's in the process of redoing his website right now, so I'm hoping it'll be a little bit easier. I do a bunch of books of his that I have floating around. One that's often recommended that I don't recommend is Paul Johnson, History of the Jews. People seem to love it. I'm not a huge fan. There's things that I like about it, but I would not recommend that as a great comprehensive summary of Jewish history. Ken Spiro has a great book called, I think it's called Crash Course in Jewish History. Hard to find. I think you can get in PDF form from his website. I don't know if it's in publication anymore. That's a good, comprehensive summary of Jewish history. And let's see, a few others. I mentioned the Con Journal before. That's if you like little subjects, articles on subjects in Jewish history, and you want them given over in a great way. I don't know if you asked for one or many publications. I just gave you like 10, but and I'll tell you one that I found invaluable. I'll pull it out here. My go-to history books are on my shelf right behind me, but this one I found is awesome. Codex Judaica. Let's see if I can get that clearly in the screen there. I have to make sure I hold it the right way. Right, the Chronological Index of Jewish History. Excellent resource. This is basically from creation until modern times, just for sources and just to get the chronological story. And if you want to know, something happened, where it happened, where to look it up, he brings all the sources down. Excellent English work here. Then there's also the classical Seder Olam, Seder Adoros, classical Jewish works on history in Hebrew. But no shortage of recommendations.
Have you familiar with Rabbi Talushkin's Jewish Literacy? I don't know if you mentioned it.
Yeah, I have that somewhere in my house. That's a good. Also, just look up topics along those lines. Both Encyclopedia Judaica and the Jewish Encyclopedia, very good resources.
Awesome. So we're wrapping up here. Just two more questions.
Sure.
So as part of a recurring conversation that we're having on the Two Tall Jews show and on the page, we'd like to talk about the word anti-Semitism. So it was one of the first conversations that we had, on our multiple recordings when we were trying to release our first episode. But from a historical perspective, anyone that knows the history of the word will know that it's got a very anti-Jewish intention, right? It was created by an anti-Semite in order to desensitize Jewish hatred. But now in 2020, it's the word to describe Jewish hatred. So number one, do you believe that perhaps we should start a movement to change the word to something like anti-Jew or Judeophobia? Or do you think that that's a bad idea just because anti-Semitism is understood? And if we're keeping it, are we gonna ever agree within the Jewish community how to spell it?
The latter, the answer is for sure no, because look at Hanukkah, which the transliteration of that word exists a lot longer than the word anti-Semitism, and there's no consensus on how to transliterate that word. Again, in Hebrew, we all know how it's spelled, but in transliterated Hebrew, we have no clue how to do it in any form of uniformity. So the second part's very easy. No, there's no way there'll ever be uniformity in that. As far as changing the word, it's interesting. I go back and forth in my head about the idea of words. One idea I actually got from Ken Spiro, who I don't know if he spoke when you guys were on Hasbara, but Ken Spiro made a great point once where he said that in debate and discussion, you never want to use the terminology of your opponent, because when you use the terminology, you're conceding a point. He used this in reference to the Arab-Israeli discussion. He would say you never refer to the intifada as intifada. Right? Intifada in Arabic means shaking off filth, right? That's what it's called by the Arabs. We call it the Oslo War, or that's what we refer to, the war on terrorism, or the terrorist war, or whatever you want to call it. So too, we don't call it the West Bank. You call it Judea and Samaria, because when you start to call it these things, you're conceding a point to your to your opponent. East Jerusalem, that's implying that Jerusalem is split in two, right? So we don't want to concede these points in terms. That being said, I think there's a whole nother realm of how to look at this. For example, very much in today's topic, the topic of Black Lives Matter and the Black community / African American community, and what to refer to that community as, and what's the politically correct way to refer to that community. When I was growing up as a kid, it was the African American community that just started to become the politically correct term. Now the community has segued to calling it the Black community. Regardless, I think who's ever making those decisions or talking about it is missing the point. The point is not the term, the point is the community, and the point is the meaning of the term based on, behaviors and interactions with the community. And I think the same goes for us. Like, I don't think it necessarily matters if we call it anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism or philo-Semitism for those who like Jews or whatever it is, or philo-Judaism. I don't think these things matter so much as as long as the terms are clear. And I think when people hear the term anti-Semite or anti-Semitism, most people are not thinking, he's anti-Arab or he's anti-Greek, talking about other Semitic people. I don't think that enters people's heads nowadays, except for maybe people who know what the etymology of the term is. I think it's pretty clear, lock, stock, and barrel, that it means being anti-Jewish. I think in terms of, a question that I love to get and I love to dispel is when people ask me if I'm an Orthodox Jew. I say, no, I'm not an Orthodox Jew. I'm just a Jew. Right? I'm a traditional Jew. I'm a Torah Jew. I'm not an Orthodox Jew. Why? Because like you said, similar to the creation of the term anti-Semitism, the term Orthodox Jew was not created by the Orthodox Jews, right? It's almost never created by the people who take the label. It was created by the Reform Jews, and they made it as a term on the Jews who say traditional to try and identify them as being archaic, and backwards and not moving forward with the times. But be it as it may, people know what Orthodox Jew means. So, I have to bite the bullet and stick with it sometimes. I'm giving a class this week for one of my, I have a series that we're in the middle of called Great Fights in Jewish History. And we're doing the topic of the development of the Hasidim this week. So I almost never use, I'll use it in the class, but I almost never use the term misnagdim to describe the non-Hasidim. Because what does Hasidim mean? Pious ones. What does misnagdim means? Their opponents. Who do you think came up with those terms? right? It's the pious ones versus their opponents. But bottom line is, people know you're talking about a misnagi, you're talking about a Lithuanian-style yeshiva guy, right? That's what you were talking about. So I have to bite the bullet and use the term sometimes. So I think with anti-Semitism, the same thing. People know what the term means. There's no ambiguity about it, and there's been many wonderful works written on it. I always recommend. I don't know if you guys have read it yet. Barry Weiss's fairly recent book, "How to Fight Anti-Semitism." Excellent book. I love the book. I love the historical research of it. And I love her conclusion. And I love the fact that she finally left the New York Times over it. Right? But excellent book on the topic, and an important topic to discuss.
Just wrapping up here, if you had a gigantic billboard that you could put anywhere where millions of or billions of people could see it, what would you say on it and why? What kind of message would it deliver to the masses?
I think I would probably put one of my favorite quotes, which is, if you see my Instagram profile, you've seen it there. It's the famous George Santayana quote of "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." That kind of sums up one of the reasons I love history, because especially from a Jewish perspective, like as Jews, there's almost nothing new, right? Shlomo Melech, King Solomon said it. There's nothing new under the sun. It's very true with our history. Like anything the Jewish people are going through today, we've gone through 5 or 10 times over. And if we could just learn from past challenges and past mistakes, we would be able to really propel forward in a massive way. So I think that's what my big billboard would say.
I think that's it for us. Do you have any questions for us?
No, I want to thank you guys for the opportunity. I want to wish you continued hatzlacha, continued success in what you're doing and building what you're doing. And it's such an important realm to be in, just to get the Jewish people to appreciate their amazing history and the amazing story. Now, I guess I will close with one idea that I often quote. It's the something that just this morning someone said it to me. They were asking me a certain question pertaining to Jewish history, and he said, "Yeah, I like to study Jewish history, but it's so depressing. It's like this pogrom and this war and this genocide and this Holocaust and this one. It's like every turn they're trying to kill us. They're trying to wipe us out. 100,000 over here, 10,000 over here. 5. It's so depressing." And I said, you know what? It's depressing unless you have it in perspective. And I always say the perspective on Jewish history is the fateful words of Rav Yaakov Emden in the introduction to his Siddur, where he wrote that the biggest miracle ever to happen in world history is the fact that the Jewish people are still here. He said it dwarfs the splitting of the sea, it dwarfs the 10 plagues, it dwarfs the miracles in Israel and the temple, the fact that the Jewish people are still here following Judaism. And he wrote that in the 18th century. So all the more so now, more than 200 years later, is that the biggest miracle. So when we study these things, there is a depressing aspect in the details, but there's a absolutely beautiful and amazing aspect in the bigger picture. And that's what I always tell people to focus on. Awesome. It's been a pleasure, guys. Thank
you.
Whatever I do to help you guys out, let me know. And I just wish you all the success in the world with what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks again to Rabbi Landis for that interview. That was amazing. We really enjoyed having you on the show, Rabbi, and we hope to bring you back on soon. Moving on to our last segment of the day, we are going to do what we call the Diaspora Report, and that is our report from the diaspora. Now, I saw this interview that was done on Times of Israel, and they interviewed the absorption minister, Pnina Tamano-Shata. Tamano-Shata is the first Ethiopian member of an Israeli cabinet, the cabinet being the group of ministers that work with the prime minister, right? It's kind of like the executive branch of Israel. And she is a member of the Blue and White Party. She is the granddaughter of a Kaid, which is an Ethiopian Jewish rabbi, and can trace her roots all the way back to Abba Mahari, who was a famed Ethiopian Jewish leader who in 1862 actually tried reaching Israel. Her family came to Israel as part of the Operation Moses in 1984 when she was 3 years old, and she was one of the first Ethiopian families to move into Petah Tikva. She excelled at her studies. It sounds like I'm introducing her for an interview, but I just feel like this is good. People should know a little bit about her. She excelled in her studies. She was part of a gifted program in a religious girls' high school. She was an operations sergeant in the IDF in the Home Front Command. She got her law degree, and then in 2018, she was already a minister of Knesset, and then she got a degree in public policy from Tel Aviv University. Before that, in 2005, she became a journalist. Safe to say, very experienced in different areas. And one of the things that they talked about in this interview was the fact that she's one of the few people in the government who's actually trying to produce policy. So this government for those who don't know, living under a rock, or maybe you just don't know anything about Israeli politics, but there's been 3 elections. Obviously, they've been rocked by coronavirus. There hasn't been much in terms of domestic policy being done, a lot on the foreign policy, as everyone knows, but there hasn't been much on the domestic end. And people are mad, people are rioting, people are protesting, mostly protesting, actually, not so much rioting. And some of the things that she's working on, and now we'll open up to discussion, she's working to enhance the Lone Soldier program, which in Israel, it's a program that Jews or anybody who wants to join the army can go, and they're given help from the government but they're basically alone. They're given help to live. They're basically alone, and there's been a lot of either depression or actually suicide rates that have been pretty high in the Lone Soldier community. She wants to devote a lot of time and effort into actual Hebrew education. A lot of people feel like they're not good enough. And how is she paying for all this, you ask? She's smartly reorganizing a lot of unbudgeted money from the coronavirus stimulus and then using it for the new immigrants. So she comes from an immigrant family. She comes from a minority in Israel, right? And the Ethiopian community. So it's just nice to see this sort of person in government. And
Absolutely.
I don't know what should we discuss first, this Lone Soldier program or the absorption, her desire to improve the absorption process.
Let's discuss the Lone Soldier program.
Right.
When I think of the Lone Soldier program, I think of the program in the United States that we have. Oh, I forgot. We don't really have one. So I illuminate the void. I'm not from a military family, but whether it be veteran suicide rates or just the sheer number of veterans that live in poverty when they come back from war, and I guess all countries deal with this problem differently, and I'm glad that Israel deals with it well. I think that...
Well, they try.
That's the thing. And by try, they at least take responsibility. And, I mean, do you have friends that have served in the IDF, right?
Yeah, and I think from my friends that have been lone soldiers, a lot of them, it's the ones that aren't able to make friends quickly, I think, that have the biggest issues. Because as soon as you make friends, and then that friend essentially becomes like a family. That friend might open up their house for you, might be there for you financially, or might be there for you when you're missing certain things. So it's the ones that have a tough time on a social side, who, when they leave base and they go back to their apartment, they're literally alone. They have nobody to hang out with. Maybe they're not so good at Hebrew yet. So there's a lot of mental health issues. And then even more when they actually leave the army and they're really on their own and the subsidies from the government stop, what then? So that's where Pnina is sort of trying to step in and be like, we're still here for you. We're here for you to find an apartment. We're here for you to find furniture. We're here for you to teach you Hebrew if you still don't know Hebrew. And I'm not a guy that's like, oh, the government should take care of everything, but I think the government should be there to help out and to be there for you, so, to put you in a position of agency, so that when you're ready, you can actually be like, okay, I don't need it anymore, and I've positioned myself in a place where I don't need the government help anymore.
Yeah, and I think that any program that aids in the development of those that put their life on the line and make the ultimate sacrifice should be cared for, and their process of rehabilitation should be aided.
Yeah,
I think that's a good use of taxpayer dollars.
Yeah. And then again, there's obviously been backlash too to her, to be from Israeli citizens that are like, why are these immigrants getting the money before us? So, right. There's two sides to that as well. All right. Bubbe's Delight.
Today, I just want to say, for all those Jews out there it is a delight to still have a bubby. And I unfortunately do not. I know that you do, Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to flip Bubby's delight on its head this week. And in lieu of showing my favorite, the best, the incredible, the incredible licorice from Russ and Daughter.
You got to get them on as a sponsor at this point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the Jewish Museum, because they're in the Jewish Museum too.
Maybe they'll follow us back finally.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I flip it on its head.
Yeah, I want to say that it's. I've been thinking about my bubby a lot, and I always think of my bubby as the high holidays approach, and yeah, and it's as it brings me delight to think of how the formative role she played in a key part of my past. I think it's always good to rejoice when you have elderly grandparents, and yeah, aren't you delighted to still have a bubby, Mayor?
Yeah. Way to throw that Jewish guilt on me, but yeah, I definitely am. It's nice. I have 2 bubbies. Thank God.
You call her every Shabbat, right?
During the week, actually, because
before every Shabbat, I meant.
Right, at some point before Shabbat. But yeah, it's a blessing. She's been around my whole life, obviously. Thank God, and
it would be odd if she was born after you, if she wasn't around for your entire life.
Well, I mean, also like physically, she's been around. Some people, they live in different places, and
right.
And it's really just a phone call. So even during these pandemic times, we've been able to see each other. And yeah, it's definitely a delight to have a bubby.
Did you have a food that you wanted to supplement with your love for your bubby, or did you?
No, actually, I was going to go get something. But
awesome, great.
Yeah, I think that does it for today.
Great. Well, yes.
Thank you for tuning in to our episode of the On This Day in Jewish History podcast, The Two Tall Jews Show.
Make sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications if you're catching us on YouTube. Follow the main page at On This Day in Jewish History, again, 1H, on Instagram for daily posts and direct engagement with us.
And if you're listening to us on any of the podcast apps, please hit the subscribe button, leave us a review. It means everything to us.
See you next time.